On the Tuesday edition of the Buddy Martin Show, I'm your host, Lauren Meadows. Tonight we're joined by Rob Brown of SEC Sidelines, Franz Beard of Gator Media, telling us what made him fall in love with Gator basketball. And later we will be joined by Kyle Crooks, who was the voice of the Gators on the call for senior night and the big win against Ole Miss. Also, executive producer Brendan Martin. Tell it like it is Tuesday. Here we go.
Yes, it's time again for Buddy Martin. Call him up and tell him what you're thinking. But be kind because he's doing the best he can.
Better, stronger, faster.
Mama says that alligators are ornery because they got all them teeth but no toothbrush.
Hey, what if the voice calls while you're gone?
Take a message.
Bye.
You ready, champ?
I'm ready for this my whole life.
I'm incapable of small talk. But that's why you love me, right?
Kind of intimidating to be in the presence of so many great athletes.
Welcome to the Tuesday edition of the Buddy Martin Show. I'm your host, Lauren Meadows, joined by Rob Brown of SEC Sidelines, Brendan Martin, executive producer of Gator Media, the Buddy Martin Show, and all great things
of all life
on the YouTube channel. Hit the like and subscribe button. Use the QR code. And, tonight we'll be joined by Franz Beard here shortly, talking about Gator basketball, but most importantly, what made him fall in love with Gator basketball. Franz has a great story highlighting what makes Gator basketball great. And then we'll be joined later by Kyle Crooks, who is the voice of the Gators for many sports, including softball, soccer, baseball, women's basketball, but had the pleasure of being on the call for men's basketball and the big win against Ole Miss this past weekend, where I think the Gators showed themselves to be the number one team in the country.
I'm just
so the Gators
shirt on
as the Gators get ready to head to Nashville this coming Wednesday to get ready to scout for the teams, got that most coveted double bye. And so we'll be looking forward to good things in the SEC tournament. But as always, this time of year is spring football. The Gators completed their third spring football practice and seem to be hitting on all cylinders. And, I was out there today, guys, and, talked to Rob Sale, Gerald Chapman. And I've said it before on the show, this is an extremely confident bunch coming off what the wins, the 4 straight wins to end the season, kind of riding the ship, found a way to get themselves off the field on third down, create some havoc on defense. And obviously you have all-world QB coming back, DJ Lagway, as well as a talented group of experienced and young receivers. We already know about the running backs. Rob Sale is high on the offensive line as well. They look to be anywhere between 6 to 7 deep. Looks like that offensive line.
And it was the deepest he's ever seen since he's been here.
Yes, the deepest he's seen has ever been here. Looks like it's going to be, household names, obviously, like Austin Barber, Jake Slaughter, Najee Harris, Damian George, Bryce Lovett look to be the starting 5. But then, guys like Jason Zamdella, Fletcher Westfall, and others, Cameron Waits, and, a host of others seem to be. And pretty much he made the comment that if 6 is as good as 5, we'll play 6. If 7 is good as 6, we'll play 7. If 8 is as good as 7, 8 is as good as 7, we'll play 8. And if 9, there's a drop off, well, then he got to, stand over by me and try to get better. But Rob, now that spring football and where we move to this space with NIL, and I saw a couple schools, I don't know if you saw that, they're kind of going more to an OTA kind of format, not really putting on the pads, doing the popping. I had a conversation with somebody, is not necessarily spring football, but in your opinion, Rob, are we losing the spring game as a barometer of position battles and even what the team may look like going into the fall?
No, I mean, if you don't have the spring game, I don't think you do, because the scrimmages, usually the scrimmage that you have the week before the Gator, orange and white game or the 8A game, that's the one where everything really is determined. And coach is probably not going to say that, but that is where they do all this stuff. But you do need the practices. Football players get good by playing more football, and trying to rest too much and taking away those reps and hitting. Ask any NFL executive, coach, front office, assistant coaches. They will tell you that the product that is coming to them out of college now, fundamentally, they're not near what they were 6-7 years ago. They're just not. So we're only screwing ourselves and the NFL themselves if they don't put the message to the colleges and say, look, we're not saying you have to have your spring game, but you better have practices, and they better be intense, because you've got to determine, you got to find out, and most people's freshmen are included. They come in January, so yeah, we're going to water the game down and weaken the quality, but we don't have to have the spring game. Just got to have the practices and the scrimmages.
And let me ask you this: if I'm a fan and I'm looking at it, sitting up in the stands at Ben Hill Griffin, do you feel? I think the spring game though is what I'm asking is, I think it's kind of taking a back seat to what they look great in the spring game. You get what I'm saying? Where it's like, oh, they look great in the spring game. I don't think the spring game gives us that anymore. Like you said, it's already built out with the scrimmages. Everything's vanilla. I mean, yeah, you get to see some guys run around, but nothing is to where, okay, man, they look good in the spring game. We're looking at a championship team.
Yeah. Well, people always get a false sense of expectations. There's usually a lot of offense, not that much defense, and it's fool's gold. But you got to have the practices. You can have 40 hours of practice in a week, but if they're not quality practices and you don't have structure and you're not trying to do something in those practices and achieving, what you're doing on your to-do list every day in practice, that's garbage time. You can practice guys for 5 hours. You're going to lose them a couple of hours, 2.5 hours into that. So, hey, if you get done in an hour and a half, you had 5 things you wanted to accomplish in practice, get the hell out of there, man. Let them go over there and shotgun some beers and just, you know what? You push people so hard, you burn them out if you're not careful. They better understand what they're doing.
Right. Well, it's going to be interesting to see here in the next, next few weeks how everything kind of shakes out. DJ Lagway is kind of on a pitch count where I tell everybody, don't worry about it. He's just fine. He's doing everything but throwing. He's running around. He's active. He's doing his mental reps against the air and all those things. So I think that, as far as the spring is concerned, the biggest disappointment I think people are going to have is they won't get to see DJ Lagway in the spring game. But other than that, you get to check out the new look Gators in some way. And with that, we'll go to commercial. I want to talk to you about our sponsor, Meldon Law, one of our greatest friends to the Buddy Martin Show, a great friend to the people, the University of Florida, the Gainesville community, proven and skilled injury lawyers since 1971. Check them out. It's that time of year. They'll be giving away awesome opportunities to go to baseball, softball, a lot of different events. I know they do plays, but definitely visit them if you have a legal issue that they can't help you with. They'll point you in the right direction with someone, particularly personal injury, estate planning, all those good things. Meldon Law, proven and skilled injury lawyer since 1971, the only official law firm partner of the Florida Gators. And with that, we bring in Gator Bait's own Franz Beard, who will be joining us to talk about a lot of things. But, as we know, Franz is our resident basketball guru, a historian, so to speak, one of the greatest writers that I've had the opportunity to read. I've been reading Franz since before I became a member of the 352. And, Franz just has an interesting take on life. not just sports. So if you get the opportunity to spend some time with Franz Beard, you will be blessed by that. But Franz, we got the SEC tournament coming up. You'll be traveling along, tracking the Gators, but from what I understand, you started to take a little look at the game of basketball as a whole, but particularly the Gators, and what made you fall in love with Gator basketball. So enlighten us on, just your the world that you're in, the basketball world, and I see you smiling when you think about basketball, but what just, I mean, what brought this out of you when it pertains to Gator basketball?
Well, it started for me back in 1963-64, and I'm getting to. I had a friend who went to my church who said always had an extra ticket, and whenever he had an extra ticket, he'd come by, honk the horn, say, "Come on, let's go." And so I'd go to Gator games back when Brooks Henderson and Tommy Baxley were the backcourt, but I also got at that time to watch the freshman games, and they had, back in those days, freshmen weren't eligible, and I watched a guy named Gary Keller come along, and he became an All-American, still a tremendous Gator who follows the Gators religiously, lives down in St. Petersburg. People don't realize that in 1966-67, Florida probably, if they hadn't gone cheap on the coach, Norm Sloan went back to North Carolina State. Norm didn't want to go. He had recruited the tallest team in America. I mean, the Gators were, we talk about the Florida size now. This is in 1966-67. Gary Keller, 6'10", Jeff Ramsey, 6'11", McElroy was 6'7". David Miller played guard, 6'6". They played one guard, two forwards, two centers, and they came off the bench in waves with even more height. And this was a big team, but Florida had gone cheap. Norm Sloan wanted to stay here, and he said, "I'll stay to Ray Graves if you'll just give me new carpet in my office." He was making the astounding sum of $15,000 a year at the time, and North Carolina State was offering $22,000, but he knew what kind of team he had, and he said, "I'll stay. Just carpet my office." And Ray Graves said, "I think you better take that North Carolina State job." So they named Tommy Bartlett the basketball coach, and he was a tennis coach who had somehow been an assistant basketball coach. And it's funny because I was talking to a former Gator at the time who said, "We had the best team in the SEC by far, and yet we don't make it. We're 21-4. We don't win the SEC because our coach is hooked on a 1-3-1 defense, and we didn't have anybody quick enough to run the baseline and cover people." So Florida goes 21-4, but that's when I really fell in love with the game. I mean, Neil Walk was a great Gator at the time. The Gators beat FSU. Or they're beating them. It's 7-2 with one out in the bottom of the ninth. But I was very fortunate that when I was at Westwood Junior High, Norm's daughter sat on one side of me. Gene Ellinson's daughter sat on the other side of me in Mr. Hoffman's math class. And Gene Ellis's daughter made me. I was the original Mongo before there was ever Mongo on. Gene Ellis's daughter had come in, and I was like, I couldn't move my lips, etc., like that. So, but Florida basketball has run hot and cold. We had the 70s, and I thought we hired John Lotz from North Carolina as assistant coach. Had a couple of good years, but there was always the promise of a better arena. They played in old Alligator Alley, and I think, Rob, I think you remember some of the old arenas. Auburn used to play in a place they called the Barn.
Yeah, the sports barn burned up. LSU game in '96. I was there. Some LSU fan had a fire going underneath it and left their hot dogs grilling during the game. And every vehicle around there was burned down to the wheel hubs. It was a terrible night.
It was a Thursday night game, if I remember.
Where the
Was it,
gymnastics team
Rob?
played. No, it was
it
Saturday.
A Saturday night
Yeah,
game?
it was. Yeah, lost 19 to 15.
I remember that because
that was
incredible. Where you have the circular walkways at the end of each grandstand stand, you could see people's in a crowd up there looking. The game's going on back here. They're looking over here because they're watching the fire that goes on. I remember that well. But I'll tell you what. Since we're talking about memory lane, Johnny Mingelt. Great basketball player at Auburn. Another, then they have Barkley, Chuck the Rifleman Person, and what was his name? Morris.
Chris Morris, the praying mantis.
Morris. Chuck Person, they called him the Rifleman because 6'8" guy that could just, his range was when he got off the bus. And they had Barkley.
Well, and hey, friends, I remember in college when Norm Sloan was coaching Florida because he wore that plaid jacket. He was ahead of Wimp Sanderson. And every time he'd get up off the bench, the crowd would go, "Sit down, Norm." But, I tell you, what's the big guy that got away from Merritt Island, Florida, went to Vanderbilt? He was about 8 feet tall. Will Purdue. Remember him?
Yeah, I do. He was a guy that would have signed with Florida, along with Jeff, whatchamacallit, I'm trying to think of his name, also played for the Orlando Magic. Florida was going to have an incredible recruiting class, but these guys got away because the promise was broken again about an arena. They finally got the arena. Norm's second year coming back here. I covered every game Norm had in his the year he wins the national championship at North Carolina State with David Thompson and Monty Tao and Timmy Stoddard, Tommy Burleson, Morris Rivers. I covered every single ball game they played that year, home and away. What a year that was. And then the next, but Florida had this spell. Norm got fired basically for a Mickey Mouse deal, and he bought a plane ticket for Vernon Maxwell to go up to the 5-star camp, and he got reimbursed. Vernon's mom reimbursed him, and this is amazing because literally the same thing happened almost exactly to Galen Hall. Galen Hall, to prevent Jarvis Williams from being arrested for failing to pay his child support, Galen Hall peeled off $60 in cash. Jarvis's mom came from Palatka the next morning, wrote a check, and gave it to Galen. Galen got fired because of that, and Florida went on probation because of that for football. Norm got fired for the same thing with Vernon Maxwell, and they've held a grudge against Vernon ever since. Vernon Maxwell is the leading scorer in Florida basketball history, and the higher-ups at the firm haven't got the guts. They took away his last 2 years saying, oh, he was taking money from agents. Who? You know the word.
Well, and France, I'm glad you kind of segued into that because I don't know if you've noted in the last probably about month or so, Vernon Maxwell has kind of started to kind of reintroduce himself to quote unquote NBA fans, and he's been on a few podcasts and things like that. But just speak to what kind of, I think a lot of people maybe know him from the NBA, and not to get into, some of the other issues, but just what kind of player was Vernon Maxwell at the University of Florida?
Vernon Maxwell had he played for Jerry Tarkanian, would have averaged 35 points a game. I'm telling you, he was that gifted. Vernon Maxwell, had he decided to play football, would have been the most gifted wide receiver you have ever seen in your life. He was 6'4", and he was an absolute gazelle. He played at Buchholz, and I've only seen about, I'd say, 3 wide receivers out of high school in my life that were uncoverable. He's one of them. He would have been the second coming of Wes Chandler. Let me put it that way. And Wes Chandler, people can talk all they want to about Percy, and I love Percy. Okay, Percy was fantastic. Percy couldn't sniff Wes Chandler's jock, and that's not a lie there. Wes Sandy Chandler was the most incredible athlete we've ever had. Period. Did things that Percy only dreamed about doing, and Percy is. They need to have a statue of Percy too. That's how good he was.
I agree. Yeah.
But Wes Sandy Chandler. But Vernon could do it all. He could drive. He was 6'4". Literally was the point guard, but because he had the ball in his hand all the time. They had Andrew Mote and Ronnie Montgomery. They called him the 3M. 3M. You got 3M, which is the Minnesota Manufacturing Man who does Post-it notes. Everybody knows that.
Oh, yeah.
And Scotch tape, I think, is a 3M product. But they had these 3 guards, and then they had Dwayne Shinsis up top. And Shinsis was 7'2" and full of the weirds. I'm telling you, self-conscious from the day he was because nobody ever made him feel normal at 7'2". Had a mullet that was down to here. I don't know if you remember that, Rob.
Yeah, I remember that.
Oh, it was a Kentucky waterfall.
had big hair up here and a mullet in the back. But what a shot blocker. And they got screwed. They should have made the Final Four. They got screwed in a game. This was the game that Syracuse ends up going to the national championship, ends up playing Indiana. Providence had a guy named Billy Donovan playing for him. It should have been Florida playing Providence in that ball game, and not
Syracuse.
Syracuse, because I got to tell you something. That game was home job like you can't believe. There's Dwayne Shinsis.
Billy Ray Cyrus, man.
Oh yeah,
you got it.
Yeah, Ivan Drago mixed with Billy Ray Cyrus. No offense, Dwayne Shinsis, but that's what he looks like.
Yeah, you're talking
Rocky Ford mixed with Billy Ray Cyrus.
That 87 game in New Orleans at the Superdome, Keith Smart, the junior college transfer guard for Indiana, nailed the shot to win it. Golly, man, the Final Fours, man, the basketball in the 80s and the 90s, and when the Big East was rolling, the SEC just didn't have as many teams going. But yeah, I remember Dwayne Shinsis. Golly,
when Keith Smart hits that shot, I have freshman English at Hannam University in Daejeon, Korea, and English that day was okay. We're going to watch the ball game. And if you have questions, I will explain them to you in English, but you have to ask the question in English.
All right.
Anyway, make a long story short, that leads to Norm Sloan gets fired. They bring in Don DeVoe, Captain Ahab. He gets he gets released after 1 year. They bring on Lon Kruger. Lon Kruger leaves after 1 year after he gets the Gators to the Final Four. He leaves because Vince Carter went to North Carolina and he said, nobody will ever be able to recruit a team that can win a national championship here. Well, I guess Billy Donovan kind of, sort of, maybe proved him just a teensy bit wrong on there. Billy is year 4 is in the final. Year 4 makes it to the championship game. 5 years later after that, 6 years later after that, wins it. And And I gotta, and let me say this, guys, because I know we're running out of time. You got other guests waiting, etc. But let me say this about, people have talked about, and I'm addressing this to one Rob Brown, this guy who's a big Auburn fan who would drink Ham's beer, who would, if he had the money, would buy the Ham's brewery. Auburn is bored. Yeah. I know that from having watched the 04s in 2006. They got bored and lost 3 games in a row. Then they right the ship by kicking Georgia all over the place, beat Kentucky on Senior's Day, win the SEC, go 6-0, win the national championship. And here's the deal, and this is what I'll say to Florida fans right now. The Gators are the best team in the country. I believe that seriously. But they may not win the national championship. I think they can. I think they will. But understand this. It's not, from here on out, it's not about being the best team. It's about being the best team that's going to go 6-0.
Yeah, that's
because, and Lauren, you know this from being a high school coach. You get into the playoffs, and the best team doesn't always win the state championship.
No,
it's about who wins the games. You go in high school ball, typically it's go 4-0, 5-0, and you're a state champ. In college basketball, you go 6-0, and you win the national championship. Billy even said that. Now, in 2007, Florida was hands down the best team, period, and there wasn't even close. Okay, they played poor old Ohio State in the championship game, and Ohio State discovered that the Gators played a little bit of defense on the perimeter. Ohio State came into that game having hit. They were shooting lights out from 3, and they went 4 for 25 against the Gators. Everybody thought that Lee Humphrey, little old skinny white boy, couldn't cover those Ohio State guards, and lo and behold, Humpers did a number on those people.
Oh yeah, shout out they had everybody. I mean, I was gonna say shout out to Daquan Cook from Dayton, Ohio. He was one of those guys that struggled that night against Florida.
Yeah, Humpers had David Lighty. I think Daquan Cook was guarded by Corey Brewer. The point guard,
Mike
Conley was guarded by Torian, and Florida absolutely shut them down. The night before, Florida beats UCLA with Russell Westbrook.
Yep.
Shut them down too.
No doubt.
And that's what I love about this team. They can shut people down. And we look at the fact that they're like 7th in the country in scoring. They're also 7th in the country in 3-point defense. Yeah. Teams are shooting 29.6%. And this is why Auburn and Florida are the 2 most dangerous teams in the tournament going forward. And I'm not saying that to schmooze you, Rob. No, I'm not trying to schmooze you and get on your show again in the morning.
No, I mean, I'm like you. I never will say something to placate people, to make them feel good. We kind of live in a time where intelligent people often are told to be quiet so dumbasses don't feel offended. I mean, you got to tell the truth. I think Florida, based on the head-to-head matchup against Auburn, and I'm being completely objective, you have to be or no one's going to take you seriously. I still think they're better than Auburn. I think Auburn's a really good team. Now, granted, you've lost 2 in a row. You've got 1 mulligan left, and that's Nashville. But the rest of them, 1 loss, you're out. But Florida, the difference is they've won 9 of their last 10. They're playing their absolute best basketball right now. Auburn, not even close.
Right. Well, before we hold on, friends, let me jump in here real quick because we got to get Kyle in here. But also, we want to mention that officially the Florida Gators have vanquished the previously undefeated Florida State Seminoles 7-2. Big win for the Gators tonight. Got to throw that in there. Then we want to tell you about Titan MRI, Gainesville and Lake City's newest. Well, not really new anymore, under new management. Joe Calorio is the CEO. Got to see Joe last night at the Lagway Foundation dinner. doing big things with Titan MRI, Gainesville, Lake City, and surrounding areas. It make you feel, this hadn't changed. Still great customer service, some of the best MRI machines in the business, big wide open ones for claustrophobic guys like myself. But Titan MRI back under new management, merging and ready to roll. Titan MRI, Gainesville, Lake City, and surrounding areas. And with that, we bring in Kyle Crooks, who was on the call this weekend for the big win against Ole Miss. How you doing, Kyle?
Good. How's everybody doing? Yeah, it was a lot of fun,
Good.
a lot of energy in that building.
Yeah, so tell us about it, man. You got to fill in for Sean Kelly. I know you do a lot of basketball, really driven and well versed on the teams that are playing. But what did you see from the Gators Saturday night?
More of the same, guys. I mean, defending at a high level. I think early turnovers were an issue, especially in the first half. And when Lee had talked to Todd going into half, Todd was livid. He had the box score in his hand. And he was looking at the numbers. I think the Gators had 9 turnovers going into half, and obviously that's not going to get it done. It's a team that usually doesn't do that, but Ole Miss doesn't turn the ball over. So I think it was a 9-1 discrepancy. It held Ole Miss to under 31% shooting for the half. And in the second half, you just kind of pull away, finally hit some shots. It's a really good team. It's guard driven. All the seniors were in double figures. Alex Condon, another double-double. Is just more of the same consistent play that you've continued to see. And it's a team that is playing at the highest level right now as you enter the SEC tournament, and brings in that old argument. Now the Gators would only have to win 3, obviously, to win the tournament championship here. But you want to go and win a championship. But if you're one and done on a Friday, is that the worst thing for this team, to maybe get a little bit of rest? Unless you think that, hey, to win the tournament, that's the one avenue to get a 1 seed here for Florida. So we'll see what happens. But boy, it's a lot of fun watching that team, and you could just tell the buzz all season long, guys, is back in that building for the first time in quite some time.
Yeah. Now, Kyle, you got to spend some time, obviously, with the coaches prepping for the game. And I don't know if you saw kind of the comments by John Calipari, basically saying, the SEC tournament's no big deal. How do the Gators, from the inside, from the outside looking in, or even having conversations with Coach Golden and his staff, are they, we're winning them all. You put them up in front of us, we're winning them all. We're going 9-0 basically from here on out. Is that the attitude? I mean, it seemed like to me after the game, that's kind of where Golden and his staff are. But in talking to him, have you been able to get a sense of where they are going, before they head up to Nashville?
Yeah, I didn't ask him that specifically, but if you're ever around Todd Golden, he's the ultimate competitor, probably one of the most animated guys. And that's in a league of head coaches that, quite frankly, are lunatics. When you watch him on the sidelines, he's right up there with his competitive drive and all that. I don't see a game where Todd Golden goes in and if the Gators are on the wrong side of the scoreboard, where he's not fired up. I think they want to go all in on winning this thing. Last year, kind of part of it too, they were also close. They were right at the finish line there. They made that run, and of course, what happens with Micah and the SEC tournament championship against Auburn, I think that's a notch on the list. You talk to guys from Patrick Young's team, or you talk to Lee Humphrey from the back-to-back national championship teams. This is a part of that checklist. If you're a competitor, if you're a champion, if you're a winner, you didn't get to win the regular season. Auburn won that. So that's one thing you didn't check off the list. There's a few guys that I'm sure it feels slighted when it comes to the all SEC stuff, whether that's Elijah Martin, Will Richard, what have you. I'm sure those guys have an axe to grind when it comes to the SEC tournament. So you didn't check off that one box. Can you check off the next one? And then you want to go on the run in March Madness and win a national title and check off that ultimate box. But you talk to any competitor for any one of the great Florida teams of all time, the SEC tournament, that really, really matters. And I think it's no different with this coaching staff and these players.
Yeah, France.
How the hell did Martin
well, that's what I was going to ask you, France. There you go. I was going to ask you. That's where I was going is, are you surprised? I mean, the SEC all-conference team came out. Walter Clayton Jr. was first team Alex Condon was second team. But yes, there were some visible names missing,
Oh.
including Elijah Martin. I thought should have been on one of the teams, but then obviously to not be named to the all defensive team. And then also, and friends, you may know, because I think you get a vote, the fact that Thomas Houck, I thought he maybe would have garnered 6th Man of the Year awards as well. I know it went to the guy from Missouri, but I know you. What was your take on that, friends?
I thought Tommy Houck should have been the 6th Man of the Year. I thought that Zakai Ziegler as the Defensive Player of the Year.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, let me put this: the best defensive player in the SEC is Wade Taylor IV. Period. End of story. There's nobody in the league that literally, I think Elijah Martin's on that same plane with him, but give me a break. These two guys are elite defenders. Will Richard is an elite defender. I don't even think Zakai Ziegler is the best defensive player on his team. I think he might be the second or third best defensive player on his team, but I don't think he belongs as the defensive player of the year in the SEC. Janai Broom does not make defense, even the all defensive team. And this is what happens when sports information directors, some of whom shouldn't be allowed to watch a ball game, much less have a vote on who makes all league or whatever like that, vote on it. I think you're going to see when the Associated Press team comes out, I think you'll see a far more reasonable team. But I got to tell you, Elijah Martin, Kyle, I don't know what you think about him, but I think Elijah Martin is, he is one of these guys. He and Wade Taylor IV are two guys in the league, undersized, who can defend 4 positions. And there aren't two. There may be only 4 guys in the whole league capable of doing that.
Go ahead, Kyle.
Yeah, it's a defense, guys. That was a 90 defensive rating last year, all the way to a top 10. I think they dropped to a 10th defensive efficiency rating in the country after the Alabama game. That tells me that there's a lot of guys that are really good defenders on this team, and Elijah Martin, that's his calling card. I think you get this all year, or every year in every conference. You have a handful of guys that are like, what the heck happened there? And it comes down to some of the voters that maybe don't watch all the games and watch it in depth, and you just sort of pick the same names all the time. I think that's an issue with the voting process and these all conference awards. Clearly, Elijah Martin should have been on the all defensive team. That's pretty ridiculous.
Yeah, Rob, were you surprised at maybe the lack of the Auburn guys as well? I know, newcomer of the year. I'm sure some of the Auburn people were a little upset about that. But even like Fran said, Janai Broom not being on the all defensive team as well, even though he was player of the year.
Well, Kyle's right. The list, when they come out, if you've ever voted on any list, and we all have, you get an email now, and you're busy doing stuff, and you're just going to take the low-hanging fruit. Oh, yeah. I mean, there have been years in the past when All-American teams come out, and there'll be a guy that was second team All-SEC. And that's just laziness. I mean, there's no other term to describe it. Walter Clayton, and watching him play, he is so important to Florida. He's the leader. I think he is. Alex Condon. I mean, Florida's a different kind of team. So most of the guys that were picked first team All-SEC, all defensive team, whatever, are on different kinds of teams. Florida's almost a throwback because of the 5 tall trees, and they can run up and down the court. It's going to be fun watching them in the tournament. I think everybody's biggest question is, how hard are Auburn, Florida, Alabama, and Tennessee going to go in this tournament? They should go 110%. But we all know they want to get rest, but they also don't want to get embarrassed. They're competitors.
Yeah, I think it's the iron sharpens iron, man. I think that's where you got to kind of look at it is you got 4 teams that are, arguably 4 of the top 5 teams in the country, and you're going to get better, and you're going to be, well served by going at it, because like I said, iron sharpens iron. You want to play the best, and you don't want to be battle tested. So I think that, I agree with Kyle and Franz both. I think that's a good point, Kyle. You talk to guys that have done it in the past, and winning this tournament is part of the bigger picture and making the trip to San Antonio. So Kyle, have you heard anything as far as where the Gators may end up? Is it pretty much the West? I think Auburn, I mean, it's easy to say they probably want Auburn and Atlanta for the regional if they can, but does it look like the San Francisco region for the Gators right now?
I mean, from what I've heard, especially if you're that last 1 seed, you're probably going out west. I've heard Raleigh thrown out there as well, especially if you're one of the higher 2 seeds. So I don't necessarily know being that last one and going out west has all that much of an advantage to being a higher 2. I haven't really dug all that deep into it, but you talk to some of the coaches. Obviously, you want to be a 1. You put that in the media guide. It's a really big deal to be a 1 seed in the tournament. To me, Lauren, does that make a huge difference if they're the last 1 or the first or second 2? Again, that's where this SEC tournament comes into play. If you are truly a team that wants that number 1 seed, then you probably have to win, 2 games here in the SEC tournament. And if you win the whole thing, you're guaranteed to get a 1 seed. So for me, I think it's not all that important. You talk to the coaching staff, they're going to be a 2 at lowest, and I think they're fine with that.
Franz, what are you hearing?
Well, I think Florida's going out west unless Florida wins it. Florida wins it, that changes the dynamic. If Florida wins in Nashville, and they're sitting there at 30 wins, you almost have to seed them. I think they have this decision made somewhere that that they feel an obligation to make Duke either the first number 1 or the second number 1.
Right.
I think there's an obligation. They feel obligated because it is Duke. I can't stand Duke. Gosh, guys, I spent too many years covering the ACC and having to sit at games at Cameron Indoor Stadium and stuff like that. So I can't stand Duke. I'll be honest with you, but just the same, I think Duke, if they were playing in the Southeastern Conference, Duke would struggle to be the 5th team in the league. I think Alabama, and they beat Auburn and Cameron, but they shot a lot more free throws than Auburn. Auburn had a lot more fouls called, etc., like that. Put them on a neutral court. Houston is they're dying to give them one number 1. Houston lost to Auburn. Houston lost to Alabama. Houston lost to Kansas. Etc. like that. Duke lost to Kansas, and Kansas is not good. Duke lost to Kentucky, which is an average Kentucky team. The SEC is that good. And now I gotta be honest with you. I think Florida, Tennessee, Auburn, and Alabama, I think their competitive juices will flow to try to win this thing. I think what Calipari's talking about is this. If I'm Arkansas, I'd like to win a couple ball games, but I do not want to get to that championship game having played 4 straight nights and then have to get out there and get embarrassed and maybe all of a sudden see all the goodwill I got, all the goodwill I built up the first couple nights, suddenly it goes down the drain because I got killed by 30 points by Alabama, in the quarterfinal or semifinal. And I think that's what Cal was talking about is you can, if you're one from those lower levels and you get a couple wins, it's a big deal, but you really and truly, unless you have to win 4 to get to the to get in the NCAA tournament, if you won 2 and you've solidified things, I think Cal would just soon say, "Hey guys, it's been fun. We're going."
Right. And Kyle, speaking of a couple wins in the tournament, you were on the call this past week. You kind of, You were a working man. You were at the women's SEC tournament last week, and then, like I said, came back for the call on Saturday night with Ole Miss. But Kelly Ray Finley, for the second time in her career and only the fourth time in school history, was able to win multiple games in the SEC tournament, second year in a row. Got the big win against Auburn, and then the upset win against 20th ranked Alabama. What does that mean for, we talk about the men's basketball team, but the women are starting to make waves as well, and basically doing those games and seeing that unfold and really giving LSU all they wanted to, even though the score wasn't. But if you look at the game, from a basketball perspective, probably was a lot closer than the score indicated. I mean, what were your thoughts on what you saw in Greenville?
Yeah, it was a nice step in the right direction. So back-to-back years, you win a couple games in the SEC tournament, and all of a sudden you have the thought of, can this team make their first SEC tournament semifinal since 1998? It's been that many years since the Gators have gotten to a semi in the tournament. So back-to-back last year was a big win over Vanderbilt, which was an upset win. That was a tournament team, and this year was Alabama, and that's a tournament team. They're on the verge of being a 4 seed and a host. And the women, you host the first and second round on campus sites, and that's a team that might host a first and second round game in the NCAA tournament. So, yeah, that was a huge win for them. And we'll see, Lauren, what's on the horizon for their team. There's a couple options. I don't think they want to play in the WNIT on the women's side. It's not funded by the NCAA, so it's sort of a mess to be a part of. There's the WBIT on the women's side, essentially, which is the women's version of the men's NIT, if you got that correct. It's funded by the NCAA. So we'll see if they play in that tournament, but they're playing a lot better defensively, Lauren. I think that's the biggest change for Kelly's team. Auburn held them to 50 points, held Alabama to 61 points, which was 18 under their average. So there's a lot more energy and effort on that side of the ball. And Liv McGill had a big night, scored 29 against Alabama. What was that signature win of the season? They had not had a ranked win since 2022. So a lot of good things for Kelly, and we'll see if they play in a postseason tournament, if they can kind of build on that momentum.
Yeah,
Kyle,
Rob.
Kyle, what's missing, Kyle? What does Florida have to do to make that next step? I don't get to see them, so you and Lauren answer this question, if you will, because you guys know it.
You don't want my answer, so I'm like,
yeah. I think it comes down to there's a lot of money that a lot of schools have when it comes to acquiring players. That's in the league. There are a lot of places that have invested a lot of money in women's basketball, and it shows. In the NIL space, it was not supposed to be pay for play, but here we are. It's paid for play. Even on the women's basketball side, you're looking at players that are making 6 figures coming over, and these are just above average players making legit money. And if you're not on a level playing field, this is what coaches go nuts about, because there's no regulations in NIL, and you see trickle down to certain programs, even Power 4 programs. If you're not on a level playing field, you're not getting those big-time transfers. You're not even getting the players that are 8.6 rebounds a game. Like there's a heavy coin that are going to players like that. So I think it comes down to money and the financial support that kind of puts you on a level playing field with the rest of them. I'm not in the trenches that much to know exactly all the details when it comes to that. And Kelly would say, some of those are excuses. We have to play better, have to defend better, all those things. But it comes down to talent, man. It comes down to talent, and nowadays you gotta pay for that talent.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself, Kyle. Rob, you're Auburn's looking for, I think that loss to Alabama may have sealed Johnny Harris' fate, but you're dialed into the NIL space as a whole, and not just, we're talking women's basketball, but as a whole, it's slow. It just kind of represents the haves and the have-nots in this space. I was talking to somebody, we're going to get to softball, just even the money that's being filtered now, even in softball, to some programs with this NIL. I mean, is there an answer, or is it just, as Kevin Sumlin told me a couple years ago, the new normal, and you just got to get used to it?
Well, right now it's just anything goes. I was Kelly Ray Harper. She's on SEC Network, coached at Tennessee. Didn't win enough. I mean, they got high standards up there. I think she would be a good fit at Auburn, but the market, I don't know how much they're willing to spend on the women. The WNBA, $400 million in the red. They're hemorrhaging. They're subsidized by the NBA. Well, women's game, I think South Carolina, one of our guests yesterday, won the women's SEC championship. It's going to cost them close to $5 million. So you just, I don't know if the free market's there for the women's sports. Right now, 95% of the money going to NIL is going to men's sports. And, I've got 2 boys, 2 girls. So if I had a daughter in college, I'd want her to make as much money as she could. But you can't make people. We got to have the free markets. Let them run. Now, if we go to this $21 million house settlement, football is going to get 75 or 80% of that money. So I don't know. I think the women, it's a totally different set of circumstances for the women's sports. But then you look at Oklahoma, their women have a $42 million softball stadium.
All right. Yeah.
I mean, that's the free market. They're willing to pay it. I don't know if these other SEC schools will, though.
Yeah. And speaking of Oklahoma and softball, Florida has a big softball weekend. Kyle coming in, number 1 ranked Texas Longhorns make what I think is their first trip to Gainesville, at least since in the Walton area, I would assume. But number 1 Texas coming in, you'll be on that call as well, correct?
Yeah.
For the call, yes. And just break down Texas. I had a conversation with Riley Holtorf and Kenley Cahalan. Very, very confident group of young ladies. I mean, obviously feel like they can play with anybody in the country, but what's in store for the Gators this weekend?
Yeah, so I just sort of started digging into that. We have a coach's call with, ironically enough, their head coach's name is Mike White, who was the basketball game of the basketball coach in Florida. Not the same person though. They're the runner-ups last year to Oklahoma. They have one of the best players in the country, and Reese Atwood, who's their catcher, was, I believe, the Softball America Player of the Year last year. Mia Scott, who's one of the best players in the country. They have one of the best center fielders in the country. I was looking earlier today because I have Florida UCF tomorrow for softball before I really get into Texas, and I have gymnastics on Friday, so I'm just trying to keep everything level here and make sure I have all my information.
I thought you worked hard.
I say that's a hard-working man, ain't it, friend?
When I tell you the number of things I've looked at on this laptop, but they are their strength of schedule, I believe, is 96, so they have not played really anybody yet, but they're every bit as legit. They're preseason number 1. I think Oklahoma jumped them after Texas had lost, so I believe it was Stanford earlier this year. They're off to one of their best starts in their first 30 games in program history. They only have the 1 loss. Gators have the 2 losses here. I think the Gators right now are 26-2, if I remember correctly, with the loss to A&M and the loss to Duke. So this is going to be a heavyweight fight, regardless of what their schedule is coming in. This is 2 of the best offenses. They have a deeper pitching staff than the Gators, although the Gators were able to win a top 5 road series without Keegan Rothrock. And I think they're hopeful that she's going to come back soon. Whether Keegan's going to be ready to go for Texas, I don't know if that's going to be the case. So that'll be huge, and that'll mean a freshman in Caitlin Oxley is going to have to see the start on Friday night in her first SEC home start. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Elite offense against some really good pitching, and it's going to be 2 against 3 in the country. So the Gators will have number 5 and number 2 right out of the gate in the SEC. Not bad to start things off here. But if you win those first 2, Lauren, without Keegan Rothrock against A&M and Texas back-to-back weekends, holy smokes.
Yeah,
what
they'll be on their way.
Yeah.
No doubt. Frank, go ahead.
I got asked this question by somebody today who said, is Rothrock sidelined completely, or is maybe is she available to come in and be like the closer for a weekend or 2 until she's ready to go? I mean, is she? I don't know. You guys are Mr. Softball A and Mr. Softball B right here. Here, you guys know the stuff. I'm just
you're Mr. Softball C as well, so there we go. But no, from what I've heard is it's day to day. If she's pitching, from what I understand, she's starting. I mean, maybe limited innings, but she would be, the starter from what I understand. But length of time, I know the hope, obviously, for those on the outside looking in would be Texas. They thought they could get 2 out of 3, if not the sweep against Texas A&M. They got 2 out of the 3. And then I think, they're just playing it by ear. But I think, obviously Tim Walton has been in this game long enough where he knows you want to be standing in June, not standing in March. So I think he's trying to play the long game here, maybe even to give up a few series to be standing, after the super regional. So that's kind of my thoughts on it. So
yeah, I mean, a loss to Texas in March, guys, you don't want to get swept by any means, but you lose 2 out of 3 without your best pitcher against the best. I'd say they're probably better than Oklahoma, although they're behind them in the rankings, is not the worst thing in the world. You'd still be on track to be a top 8 super regional host. You're going to be a very high seed come the postseason, and you need Keegan Rothrock healthy to win a national championship. That is the most important thing. So if you don't see her this weekend, it's a bummer, but you could still find a way to win a series. The Gators just did it this past week.
And I want to add that, and it kind of leads us to our last question. We kind of get the round table going. We got the SEC tournament. We got Florida hosting Texas, and softball be the biggest softball series in the country. We got Florida baseball heading to Tennessee to play the national champions, the number 2 Tennessee Volunteers. So with everything going on, gentlemen, and we'll kind of go around the way. We'll start with Rob first, Kyle, and then finish up with Franz. What are you looking to most this weekend, or is it the selection show on Sunday? What whets your appetite the most for the sports weekend as far as the Gators or kind of affiliates are involved this weekend, Rob?
First, it's really Florida, Auburn, Alabama, Tennessee, 4 teams. Auburn and Florida pretty much they're going to get the 1 seed. Tennessee and Alabama, the more they win, the better chance they have to go from a 2 to a 1, although that's going to be very difficult. It's just who shows up. And I think Florida or Alabama will end up winning this tournament in Nashville.
Senior night in gymnastics too, Kyle. I don't want to leave the ladies out, but
right. I almost forgot about it, and I have to work.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kyle.
I'm biased, but it's softball because I'm around it every day and I call all the games. I just want to see Texas come into the ballpark. Baseball's not in town, so the in-town show is going to be all softball. So I'm really excited to see those crowds this weekend and see if the Gators can pull out the series win. Because if they do, they're going to even grow even more in that national conversation, even though they're pretty prominent in it. But if you beat Texas, especially without Rothrock, that'll be huge.
Franz?
Well, obviously, I'm going to, you know what I'm going to pick. I'm going to pick the basketball. But you think about this. Gymnastics has 3 scores of 198. They're going to have a chance to get a 4th time. They have gone, even without Sloan Blakely, they're a national contender. Softball, I think Florida can win 2 out of 3. And by the way, Mike White is one of the great legends of softball, men's fast pitch softball pitching there's ever been. I mean, the guy came from New Zealand here to the U.S. and was an absolute legend. And it's no surprise that Texas has done so well. I would not be surprised to see Florida baseball win 2 out of 3 in Tennessee. I don't know that they will. I think that's a long call for them to do it. But the starting pitching is that good. And if they're able to get Coppola back, Aiden King, I think, has stepped it up, and he's a stud. They've got literally 4 pitchers who can get the job done as starters. So great weekend for Florida sports. And I just, my ideal would be to wake up Monday morning and the Gators won the basketball tournament. The softball team swept Texas. The baseball team got 2 out of 3 on the road at Tennessee. And gymnastics had the best senior night ever. Leanne Wong deserves it.
All right. Well, with that, gentlemen, we thank you. Rob, who you got on tomorrow?
Coach John Brady on. We'll break basketball down. Our intern, Oakley McFerrin, on spring break. So not sure if communication will support that. With 10 guys at the beach, I'm sure they're all going to bed at a decent hour.
Yeah,
But
I would imagine.
yeah, we'll have Dudley Dawson from Hogville.net, Vince Ferrara, the sports animal in Knoxville. And Kyle, I got to tell you, I'm addicted to softball. I freaking love it. I mean, when my daughter played it when she was young, at that age, it was boring. But it's more exciting, really, than baseball. And Auburn had a hell of a run. That's what got me hooked on when Myers was there. But that didn't end well. But it is just exciting to watch. And Oklahoma, you talk about bringing sand to the beach. Oklahoma and Texas. I look at the rankings last night. 1, 2, 3. And I mean, Tim Walton's a hell of a coach. This is going to be the largest crowd, I would imagine, ever for a softball game in the state of Florida. So it will be awesome to watch. I'm going to be watching it and enjoy it. And I'm just one last thing. NIL with the women. What are you seeing? Like athletic directors are telling me it's 95% to the men, and you can't make people give, but I would hope they're going out there and actively getting after it. Because I'll tell you one thing, I bet the women will be better with the money at that age than the men in terms of investing it and saving it.
Right.
Well, DJ Lagway's contribution hopefully will help a little bit. I've heard he's what is it, 6 figures, Lauren? That he's
six-figure contribution. There's not a number unless Franz knows it, but 6-figure. And then from what I heard, there could be some individual donations to the individual sports as well. So this is not done. Shout out to DJ Lagway, definitely making an investment in his female colleagues and classmates, and you got to applaud that. But you know, I don't want to hold you guys for the rest of the night, but thanks for coming on. Appreciate you having you on. Kyle, I'll come say hello at gymnastics. I'll be at gymnastics Friday, and then I'll see you we're Saturday, Sunday, Monday.
That's right.
Right? Saturday, Sunday, Monday for softball and Franz, as always. Franz, talk about your story, and then we'll get out of here for good. You got a story coming up about the love of Gator basketball.
It goes back to when I was 12 years old and going to Florida basketball games and getting to see these guys and where we sat in Old Alligator Alley. We were literally on the front row. They were bleachers, and we were on the front row, reach out and touch somebody basketball. And then I played the game at Gainesville High School with just to show how valuable I was. I tore a meniscus after my junior year, and they won the state championship without me. And my 0.000 scoring average from the year before, you know. But I've been just so fortunate. I've played the game. I've coached the game. I've had the opportunity to sit down with Dean Smith. I've had the opportunity to sit down with Norm Sloan, with John Thompson, Billy Packer. You know, back in the days when Billy Packer, it was Packer and Thacker on the network together, and great teams. Al McGuire was a personal friend of mine. I mean, I've been just so fortunate to meet guys like that. You know, Michael Jordan, Mikey, his brother Larry was a great little league shortstop, and you saw Mikey. Mikey was this big around, and his catcher's mitt was this big around, and he was. You know, back in those days, they'd give you a quarter for every foul ball you retrieved. And Mikey left the ballparks in Wilmington. He always had 2 pockets full of change. Nobody could beat him to a foul ball. But it's been a real blessing. Spike Corbin in Wilmington, North Carolina, who's was the head coach for a guy that became fairly famous named Meadowlark Lemon. And I got to meet, you know, I got to become friends with the great Meadowlark Lemon. And through Meadowlark Lemon, I met Curly Neal, and who was also a North Carolina guy at North Carolina Central.
Yeah.
And, you know, I got
shout out to the Eagles.
Yeah, I got to know Charlie Scott. And let me finish with one quick story. And you know, you hear me talk about Dean Smith. Dean Smith was one of the more remarkable human beings I've ever met. Not basketball coach. I'm just talking about human beings. He recruits Charlie Scott. Charlie's going to be the first black basketball player at Carolina. And Charlie's a freshman, and Dean calls him up and says, I'm going to pick you up for church Sunday morning. And Charlie Scott thinks Dean Smith is going to take him to the Black Baptist church or something like that. Instead, they go to the white Baptist church. And they go walking in, and Charlie is the only Charlie is the only guy among a bunch of pale faces in the whole place. And they sit down, and he said, Coach, I thought you were going to take me. And Dean just told me, he says, he says, if you're going to be part of this community, you're going to be part of the whole community. And he said, my respect for Dean Smith grew so much because here's a guy that it wasn't that long before that they had hanged him in effigy because they didn't think he could coach a lick, and here's a guy that's come along and all of a sudden he's taken Carolina to a couple of Final Fours and they still question him. And this is at a time when everybody's saying, yeah, we could use a couple black players, but those boys better stay in their place. I mean, that's kind of the way the mentality was. And Dean Smith comes along, and Dean Smith wasn't hearing any of this. Dean Smith says, you're here. You're part of this community. You're part of the whole community, not just the white community, not just the black community, the whole community. Dean Smith, for all the time I ever knew him, was always good for something remarkable that had nothing to do with basketball. And that's
why you love basketball.
That has everything to do with why I love basketball. Al McGuire talking about going to Mo Lucas's house in Pittsburgh, and Mo Lucas getting him and saying, Coach, you better walk with me because I don't know if you can handle this neighborhood. And Al says, I was a bartender in New York. I was a cab driver in New York. I can handle your neighborhood. And he said, and Mo Lucas saying, Al showed me something. He was not afraid to come. And Mo Lucas's mom washes out a jelly jar and gives him Coke in a jelly jar. And Al McGuire takes it and just drinks it like nothing to it. We miss guys like that.
Yep.
And we need men like that coaching our games. John Thompson. Oh my gosh. I know a lot of people hated John Thompson.
I love that
John
guy.
Thompson.
Awesome.
I got to tell you what. John Thompson was a man among men.
Yeah.
And because of Dean, I got to know John Thompson, Can I tell one more quick story?
Go, man. As long as the executive producer keep the tape running, you go ahead. This is good stuff, man.
Lefty comes to my house back in those days when he's recruiting Phil Ford. And he always brings a quart of Maker's Mark. And he'll have a couple drinks and everything like that. And Phil Ford ends up signing with, he came down to Maryland or North Carolina State or Carolina. A lot of people thought he was going to go to Maryland because he and John Lucas were like this. Okay, they were greatest of friends, still are. But really, it was down to North Carolina State or North Carolina or Maryland or Carolina. But anyway, Lefty's always there, and Phil ends up signing with Carolina.
Yeah.
About a month and a half later, my mom and my stepfather come to visit me in Rocky Mount. My mom, they come in. My stepfather's sitting there in the living room. My mom goes walking into the kitchen, and I've got probably about 15 bottles of Maker's Mark bourbon in various stages. And my mom comes out holding a bottle that's about this full of Maker's Mark and says, "Is there a problem we need to be talking about?" And
Lefty Drizel.
the great Lefty Driesell. I mean, from Granby High School in Norfolk, Virginia, and was a great coach there. And Davidson College, which Davidson College, which could win maybe 3 games a year, hires Lefty, and next thing you know, they had got a guy named Mike Malloy, and they got screwed out of a trip to the Final Four. Mike Malloy was 6'7" and played 8'7". Oh my!
Yeah.
But Lefty.
Did he ever give you a foot stomp when he came over to drink some Maker's Mark, Lefty Driesell?
Well, Lefty is at Carolina, and this is the year that Carolina wins. I mean, the year before, Phil Ford's a freshman there. North Carolina State wins the national championship that year. Lefty gets a call that he hates, and oh my gosh, Hank Nichols makes the call, and the late great Hank Nichols, what a great official he was.
Yeah.
Lefty turns around and stomps the chair, and this chair goes all to pieces there, and Carmichael Auditorium just absolutely explodes. After the game, Lefty's in there, and he is fuming, and then when nobody's looking, he looks over and he looks over at me, and he says, "Did I get all the chair or what?"
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rocky Mount, North Carolina. Remember, great basketball player A. Maceo Battle played at Memphis, was from Rocky Mount, North Carolina. For Lefty Driesell, I know everyone I know that ever met him in an airport, train station, anywhere would say, "Come on, man, give me a foot stomp." And he would oblige, man.
Right. Well,
awesome. Lefty said it was great with self-deprecating humor, and he said, "You know what?" He says, "I was on the road and I realized I needed a haircut, and I couldn't find somebody that does it with the hole in the middle." He said, so somebody says, "Well, Lefty, what'd you do about that?" He says, "I told him just go get a toilet seat. You just put it up there."
That's what they call it, toilet bowl.
Cut everything below it. Just leave what's on top.
Well, you can read him in Gator Bait. Great story coming up from the great writer Franz Beard about the love of basketball. Rob Brown, SEC Sidelines. I'm your host, Lauren Meadows, Gator Bait Media. And with that, we'll tell you about Renstar Medical Research. Renstar Medical Research serving Ocala and surrounding areas with health trials, dealing with Parkinson, Alzheimer's, and other afflictions. Renstar Medical Research, a superior medical research facility, seeking tomorrow's answers to the health questions of today. Rob, thank you for joining me.
Always.
We appreciate you coming out on the Tuesday night edition of the Buddy Martin Show. You guys later.
I love it.